David Davis.
Madam Chair, I will speak solely to new clause 29, which is on the order paper in the name of a number of people on a cross-party basis. New clause 29 is a very simple clause with a simple purpose: to make sure that the sanctions that we intend against the oligarchs in Putin's regime actually are effective. And before I talk about the clause in detail, I'll just remind the House of a previous occasion we had a great fanfare of action against economic crime when we introduced unexplained wealth orders some years ago. And since then we have only tried to operate them 9 times, only 9 times against 4 individuals, and they've only worked twice, so 7 out of 9 times they have failed. And the government's done something in this bill, undoubtedly, to try to improve the equality of arms between government lawyers and the multi-million pound a year lawyers on the other side. And they've done some good work there, and that will help. But it doesn't address, because it can't address the most fundamental problem with unexplained wealth orders with Russia. Because since 1990, it's been almost impossible to get any evidential information out of Russia, any trustworthy evidential information. And the very least that that does is slow down the process which will lead to sanctions. The process leading to sanctions will be incredibly difficult and incredibly slow, even with the better balance, as it were. Now, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have confirmed that the government has, the tabloid quote, I'm afraid, a hit list of more than 100 oligarchs. So far, 11 days into this conflict, we have sanctioned just 17 individuals, with some very obvious and very notable exceptions, who we can see and hear redisposing their assets even as we sit here. Press reports are quoting government sources suggesting it will take 6 months to work through the rest of the hit list. Well, and the rest. It'll take longer than that, I suspect. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I'm a big supporter of his amendment. President Zelensky is addressing us tomorrow, and wouldn't it be good for us to be able to tell him that the amendment the Right Honourable Gentleman is talking to has actually been accepted tonight, so that we can actually say we can crack down on this much faster?
Be good, because it would allow us to crack down more effectively, not so much more faster, but more quickly, but actually more effectively. Because think, what will we see during the months it takes to get these people sanctioned, get them to the legal point which we sanction? We'll see Russians scrambling to sell off their houses, dispose of their businesses, offload their football clubs, and many of the measures, we will know a lot more about it. We'll be much better informed, if none the wiser, with respect to what they're doing. Multi-million pound car collections, we load them to jets, anchors we weighed on super yachts, priceless artworks will be squirreled away, all to wend their way back to Russia or some other safe haven for these people. By the time our sanctions take effect on many, not all, but many of the oligarchs, the horse will have well and truly bolted. Indeed, the background noise to this at the moment is the sound of the stampede of horses bolting as the door creaks shut on the stables here. And that's what we have to put right. Now, this new clause will help prevent it. It won't do everything. It's only one piece of a repertoire of things we need to do. But it will allow the government to publish a hit list. Again, sorry, forgive the tabloid phrase, a list of individuals who are being considered for sanctions. Considered. In the same way that you may wait on bail before you face trial. Your freedoms for that period are restricted so you don't flee. And once a person's name appears on that list, their ability to sell, liquidate or transfer out of our jurisdiction their assets, cars, homes, businesses, jets, investments, cash, and so on, will be frozen. They'll be unable to sell them or move them out of the UK. Now, they'll still be able to use them, there'll be beneficial advantages to them, but it will simply restrict the ability to thwart what we are trying to do today. Now, given my history in this House, I may be rather surprised that I am willing to see a restriction of a specific human property right, what it amounts to, which is quite unusual. But unfortunately, we need to take action now, otherwise any sanctions the government seeks to impose will be entirely meaningless for a large number of these people. You know, we see Chelsea being sold today, we see all sorts of actions going on which can't be helpful to what we're trying to achieve. This gives the government breathing space, time to go to the legalities of formally sanctioning the oligarchs and pals of Putin that rightly deserve to be the target of these sanctions. And while the government has identified 100 oligarchs to sanction, other countries have identified more. This is going to be a long war. These sanctions are going to be in place for years, not months, but they will only have effect. They'll only have effect if we move more quickly than the targets. Not for the moment. I'm just about to finish. If we move more quickly than the targets, moving rapidly is the only way to ensure our sanction actually hits Putin where it hurts. I will give way. I've never not given way in my life. So there we are.
It's a very important amendment is tabled. One of the difficulties with it, and he would probably concede that what we also need alongside this is the transparency of a beneficial ownership. Otherwise, you wouldn't know they own those assets. That's the problem. Lots of those assets, the ownership, are hidden. Does he agree we need a day one right, a day one capability to be able to see who owns those assets for his clause to be truly effective?
Yes, I do. But bear in mind, one at a time, bear in mind the burden here falls on the person who's sanctioned, and the responsibility and the requirements fall on the person who's sanctioned. I give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful. I wasn't going to intervene on it, but I was looking back through this list. Does he think there's a slight problem here? Because it talks of selling any assets they own, moving any assets they own or have interest out of the United Kingdom, or moving any of their funds out of the United Kingdom. Doesn't cover anything about gifting out to an individual who may then transfer them immediately. Does he think that ought to be in there as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And the reason gifting, transferring to relatives, this is another category. And the reason it's not in there is because I almost ripped out of the legislation we put in place for Skripal, and that also omitted that. That's why. But he's quite right, and had we had an acceptance today, I'd have looked to make two changes going to the Lords. That will be one, which will be tightening it, and the other one will be an appeal right if it went on too long, the other way around, to balance the human rights issue. And bear in mind, the National Crime Agency, for example, has people on police bail. I know of a single case where they have people on police bail for 5 years. We know nothing about it, right? So this is a much less restriction of somebody who is facing possible sanction than the NCA imposes on other people. So it will vital that we prevent these ultra-wealthy individuals with their teams of highly paid lawyers, advisors, accountants from exiting the UK with their ill-gotten gains or hiding them where we cannot find them or get them. And by the way, I am a great believer in the presumption of innocence. But if somebody comes out of the old Soviet Union, Russia, in the years between 1990 and 2010, with 1, 2, 3, 4 billion to their name, and they'd previously been an officer of the Russian state, I don't quite start with the presumption of innocence I normally would. I would start with a requirement on them to explain where it came from. It seems to me a reasonable common sense modification of my normal mad libertarian interests.
On that point,
I give way to
the presumption of innocence surely must be broad and not sort of subjective to any one individual, but he makes the point here about people on bail. The whole point is if someone is on bail, a case has already been presented and built up. And of course I understand the point that he's trying to get to that point where the case has been built up. But my specific question on his amendment is how is it reversed if someone is not needed to be on that? Because there's nothing within his clause. How is it reversed? How does the Foreign Secretary turn around and say they're no longer on the list? Because there's nothing that specifies how that would work within his amendment.
He's right, and we would if we put this in place, we'd have to have, there would be a decision at some point. You're on the list. You're no longer on the list. We've decided you're not subject to sanction. That's clearly got to be a part of the operation. And by the way, on bail, police bail doesn't quite work the way he thinks it does. I'm afraid. The case I had in mind, there's no case, but they've been on police bail. So I'm just giving it as an example to demonstrate that this is not an unheard of option. And I'm looking at the Madam Chairman. So let me finish by saying, backing new Clause 29 will ensure our sanction regime will have real effect. It's proportionate, it's simple, and it will be effective.